Welcome to the Valpak seminar on an introduction to international compliance. While most UK companies are fully compliant with their obligations under producer responsibility regulations in the UK, many are completely unaware of the existence of equivalent regulations within the EU and elsewhere worldwide. It's equally important to consider your potential obligations in any countries in which you're commercially active, whether your company has offices in Europe, retails directly via the internet, or even if you're only selling to distributors, you're likely to have regulations and requirements to consider. So what does this mean for you? While EU member states have based their regulations on the same EU directive, this does not mean that there is much harmonisation from one country to the next. Each country has implemented the requirements of the directive in its own way, and therefore you must consider each country individually. Your understanding of packaging, WEEE or batteries compliance in one country will not necessarily be of benefit in the next. Most countries have multiple compliance schemes, which means contacting them all to assess your best option can be considerably time-consuming. Outside the EU, other European countries such as Norway, Iceland, Switzerland and Turkey have introduced regulations based on the EU directives. However, these countries have also taken their own approach. Beyond Europe, there's a great deal of established and emerging legislation in Asia, Australia and the USA. As such, any non-UK country in which you're active commercially presents a new challenge in order to establish whether or not there are obligations to consider. When researching the regulations, you may run into a number of difficulties, for example the language barrier. Many countries do have English speakers, but one person's understanding of a packaging term may not be the same as the other person's. You may also struggle with time difference, which can result in considerable delays to responses. Similarly, many websites are not bilingual, or if they are, this is often limited to a brief English summary only. Terms and conditions, application forms, and online submission processes tend to be in the national language, so you may need to employ translation services. For legal reasons, regulations are often unavailable in English completely, so you may also incur significant expense in having professional translations carried out. Once you have an understanding of the regulations and requirements, you also need to remain aware of any amendments as they happen. Some changes can be highly significant. For example, the French regulations are being amended this year, resulting in considerable changes to the data form and submission process. Also, the Netherlands has decided to change from a tax-based system to a competitive compliance system similar to ours. You must also consider legislation other than packaging, WEEE and batteries. There are many other similar types of producer legislation. For example, there is a textiles tax in France for any company selling clothes or linen to end users. This includes internet sales. Having to treat each country individually, considering the separate requirements and dealing with potentially many different people, all with their own workloads and priorities, can understandably be an extremely time-consuming process. Once you establish that you have obligations in other countries, you will usually need to register with a compliance scheme, collate appropriate data, and submit it to the required authority or scheme on time and to the required level of accuracy. In the UK, we work to the standard of as accurate as reasonably possible. However, some countries, such as France, require 100% accuracy. No sampling or averages can be taken, and all weights of all products and packaging must be accounted for each year. This is particularly difficult for companies with varying product ranges. Another key consideration of data submissions is the frequency required. For example, you may be required to submit annually, biannually, quarterly, or in some cases, such as Denmark, even monthly data can be required. Costs too will vary greatly from one country to the next. Each system is different. Many countries invoice an initial joining fee, an annual membership fee, and levy rates per material in order to offset your obligations. Depending on that country's collection and recycling infrastructure, the value of the materials involved, and the number of obligated companies, costs can range from minimal to significant for the same quantity of products from one country to the next. The frequency of invoicing is equally relevant. You may receive one invoice per year. However, you could find yourself paying invoices quarterly or even monthly. When applied to several potentially obligated companies with 2 or 3 obligated service, each with their own compliance scheme, this can add up to a considerable number of invoices to be aware of. Continuing the financial theme, there are also penalties and fines for non-compliance in virtually every country which has producer responsibility regulations. As an example, the German packaging regulations have provisions which allow for up to €50,000 fine per piece of packaging not correctly declared. So overall, the process is costly and time-consuming from beginning to end, whether the time is invested in making the initial calls, translating registration forms, or checking your data for accuracy. However, mistakes can be costly, so it's time well spent, even if just to confirm that you have no obligations to consider. When you consider all of the countries which the UK commonly exports to, there is almost always firmly established or emerging legislation to be aware of. If you require further information or a greater understanding of where to begin, speak to us about attending one of our free international compliance seminars where we discuss all of this information and more in detail. To book a place, please visit valpak.co.uk/events or give us a call on 08450 682 572 and we'll be happy to help. Thanks for listening.